Hello and welcome to the second in a series of public lectures hosted by the Carmichael Centre here in North Brunswick Street in Dublin. The lectures are being held to mark the Centre's 25th anniversary and are being recorded by Dublin City FM before a live audience. Today's guest speaker is a man who, in his own words, has spent a lifetime in prison. He is, of course, the former governor of both Portlaoise and Mountjoy prisons, John Lonergan. And so, to tell us a little more about the Carmichael Centre itself and to formally introduce today's guest speaker, please give a warm welcome to the CEO of the Carmichael Centre, Diarmuid O'Curbwee.
Good evening, everybody. You're more than welcome to Carmichael Centre. Just to tell you a little bit about Carmichael Centre. We're Ireland's first and largest shared facility for not-for-profit groups in Ireland. And we currently have up to 48 different groups that are based here in the centre. We're in two fantastic buildings. You're in Carmichael House at the moment, which is about 150 years old, has a fantastic history, and one of the days we'll document it and retell it. But I know in 1916 some of the rebels came in here and got refuge from an order of nuns that were based here at that time. But there's been different residents in the Carmichael House. It started off as a medical school, and it was called after Richard Carmichael, who I discovered when I saw last week there was a Richard Carmichael Medal awarded by the Royal College of Surgeons, and he was one of the first presidents of the Royal College of Surgeons, and they founded the school in his name. And we came here 25 years ago, which was a fantastic asset to get. The other building that we have is Coleraine House, which is over in Coleraine Street, or more people might see it as Church Street, and that used to be the old Dublin Fines office, and now we have a number of groups over there. Another lovely building, even older than Carmichael House. So our mission is to help social purpose organisations throughout Ireland to be more effective and organised in achieving their mission and objectives. We do this by providing office accommodation, back office support in terms of accounting, payroll, IT, and information support and training. And a big part of what we do is we promote good practice in governance standards for the sector. As I said, there's 48 based here. Each year, those 48 organisations help over 40,000 people directly and over 100,000 indirectly through support to family members and supporters. So every day, Carmichael is committed to delivering services that help build stronger not-for-profits nationwide. So if you're involved in any not-for-profit, be it a board member, a volunteer, or a staff member, and you need some help, we're the ones to call, and we will be delighted to help where we can. As I said, we're 25 years, and to mark the 25 years, we decided that we would have a series of public lectures and look at our society today as it is, coming up to the anniversary of 1916, and we thought it would be interesting to get a number of interesting speakers to come and give their take on where they see our society today, in contrast to maybe what the vision might have been by those in 1916. We were absolutely delighted by the response that we got, and we were able to get the series up and running, and we're delighted for those people that have stepped forward, and I might add voluntarily, because we always wanted to have this as a free event, and thanks to those that have volunteered their time, we're able to do that. We'd also like to thank our media partner, Dublin City FM, who have been great and a long supporter of Carmichael Centre. We'd also like to thank Third Space, who sponsored the drinks and the nibbles that were there for people to enjoy as they came in. Tonight, we're delighted to have John Lonergan as our speaker. Most of you will already know that John is a former governor of Mountjoy Jail, which he was for 18 years until his retirement back in 2010. He also, for a time, served as governor of that high-security prison, which I was in visiting one time, but not, I think, in Portlaoise, from 88 to 92. Native of Banch in County Tipperary. He joined the prison service in 1968, so it meant he served 42 years, which is longer than 2 life terms for most people for murder. John has been a strong social justice advocate, and he argues about the direct link between crime and social economic deprivation, and believes that the biggest challenge facing us today is not the economy, and we've had certain challenges with the economy, but it's how we're going to create a just and inclusive and cohesive society based on core values of justice, equality, fairness and compassion. He published his memoir, The Governor, and The Life and Times of a Man Who Ran Mountjoy Jail in 2010. A lot of you will be familiar with that book, But some of you may not be familiar that he wrote a second book, which he gives some of his philosophy on parenting, called Parenting and Raising Your Child in Ireland Today, and which, again, all the royalties of that book go to Bernardo's. John is a highly sought-after speaker, and we're delighted to have you with us tonight, John. No more ado, I'll hand you over to John, because this is the person you came to hear, not me. So thank you.
First of all, thank you very much, and it is a pleasure to be invited and for me to come along tonight and to share a little bit of my experience and philosophy, for the want of a better word, in relation to what I think, and especially looking now forward to next year and all the big celebrations that are going to take place. And hopefully these few talks will be able to maybe give a more objective overall analysis of where we have come from and how and where and what are the challenges ahead, because there are many challenges ahead. I just myself, as well as being in a lifetime in prison, which I was, I learned a lot in prison, believe me. Everything I know, really, I learned in prison, from observing and from meeting people and from working with people and getting to know people. And all, especially around social deprivation and the consequences of it, poverty and the consequences of it, and alienation and all the many things that I learned a lot about, and including crime as well. But I was born in Bancha, as has been mentioned already, in Tipperary. Nobody here hardly ever remembers, Bancha in the 30s and 40s and 50s. But it was very famous, believe it or not, at that time, and it's very, I suppose, significant just to mention it in terms of this centre, because we had a very famous priest there at that time in the 40s and 50s, and up to 59. That was Canon Hayes, who a lot of people won't remember, but he was the founder of an organisation called Mutiny Theorem. And Mutiny Theorem was all about building communities in rural Ireland, and it was all about caring and sharing, would you believe? And his philosophy is about caring for other people, and the sharing bit was mainly around sharing your time and your expertise, which many people in this centre do all the time. And that's why the connection is so relevant and so powerful. And he definitely believed, for instance, he used to say openly that if you were healthy, if you were lucky to have good health, then you should share that fortune with those who were unlucky enough to have bad health. So if someone was sick, well, you should give those people a helping hand and share your health. If you were educated, which lots of people were not in those days, you should share your fortune in terms of education with those who were unlucky enough not to be educated, and so on. So he had a great belief that it was all about that sort of thing. And he described, which is very worthwhile mentioning in the context of this little talk, he described a community once, way back in the 40s, as, his description of a community was, it should be a social mix of equals. That was amazing way back there, because social exclusion and social inclusion, all the jargon that has come suits in, that wasn't heard of in those days. A social mix of equals. That was a community where everybody had a part to play, where everybody had recognition. Whether you were young or old, rich or poor, it didn't matter. A community was supposed to accommodate everybody. And he was very strong on that, and he was very strong on the need for it in rural Ireland. It's probably more needed today than it was back in the 40s and 50s, believe it or not, because of many things. And I'm going to look at some of the things. I wasn't there in 1916, and so I can't talk from experience. But I was there for over 60 years of the interim period, which is a long enough time. And I've always said myself, and people of my era now, these will be people born in the late 40s and 50s and maybe in the early 60s, that group of people in particular that were born in that period of time. I still claim that we were the generation that lived through the greatest of all changes in our society. That's a fairly bold statement to make now, but I would argue with anybody that we lived through the greatest change of all, in terms of, like, when I was born, there was no electricity in rural Ireland. Nobody could even visualise what was Ireland like without electricity. Actually, as it happened, I'm going to boast now. I told people in Bancha I brought the light to Bancha, but anyway. But in 1947, the year I was born, electricity came to Bancha for the first time, and it was the first rural community to get electricity. So rural electrification, as it was known, started in Bancha. And the reason it started in the parish of Bancha was because of Canon Hayes. Because the ESB said, well, if anyone can get it off the ground in a rural community, it'll be Canon Hayes, because he had the contacts. We were actually in competition with our next door neighbours, Care, which is, we all went to school actually in Care because we were giant neighbouring parishes. But we were actually in competition with them to know who would be the first, and we got the nod. But people wouldn't realise it today, but people were terrified of electricity, especially in rural Ireland. They thought it was dangerous, and they thought it would burn the houses down, and there was a lot of opposition to putting the poles out through the countryside and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, I suppose it's just to say like that it is hard to go back now and to remember an Ireland where there was no electricity, because you could just imagine what it was like. And it was tough. I have always said myself over the years that there was never, to my knowledge anyway, there was never a perfect era. Because sometimes as you get older, as you get older, you're inclined to be looking back, sort of saying, well, in the good old days. That sort of stuff. And the reality is and was, there were wonderful things in the old days. And there was horrible things. And there's wonderful things today in 2015, and there's horrible things, I think. And I'll talk about some of those as I go along. But so anyway, go back to that period of time and all the changes, like, as I said, like technology, for instance. I mean, electricity facilitated the whole development of technology. And look at the technology we have today compared with what we had in the 40s and 50s. I mean, absolutely, we had nothing really in those days. Look at transport. Look the way the world has been reduced to a small place now. Anywhere in the world now, you can nearly make it in less than 24 hours. Technology has helped that. If you immigrate to America or to New Zealand or Australia now, well, you can Skype home. You can chat away from sitting room to sitting room or from kitchen to kitchen. Things like that we probably sort of almost take for granted. Well, if you went to America in the old days, you might never have come back. I had uncles, and one of them never came back. And one didn't come back for 35 years. So going away to like that on those days meant a long time away. And places like New Zealand and Australia where, well, it was a one-way journey, you didn't come back. So that, I suppose, that and many other things. I suppose I have said, and there's a lot of women here tonight, I suppose I had always said as well, that people in the old days, the people who suffered the most were women, and mothers in particular. Suffered in the sense that my mother, she used to tell us when we were growing up, there was 8 of us, by the way, so she worked pretty hard, and in every way. But she used to tell us regularly that she was our slave. And she was. Seriously, she was. Like many other mothers, and many people here's mothers were slaves as well, in the sense that they did everything by hand. My mother had to carry the water from the pump. She had to cook over the open fire. She had to bake over the fire. She had to boil the water to wash the clothes by hand. Like, everything was drudgery. Real drudgery. And there was no money. I mean, very few people had money, so money makes life, we know now that money makes life very easy, and I'll be talking about Northern Ireland in a minute, but so things were tough, and women really did work very hard with very little recognition. They also had huge families, because they were very obedient to the church, who said, have as many children as you can. So they had huge families, very little resources, but huge amount of work and drudgery associated with it. So, and their living and working conditions were brutal. I remember those myself, where women, even doing equal jobs, were paid a pittance. And women, for instance, had to leave their jobs when they got married. Oh, what stupid things. So life was tough. Money was scarce, and there was a lot of poverty. And that was the reality. But many people, have we progressed in the meantime? You see, I have to be very positive as well, because sometimes we can give too much time being negative. Now, there's a lot to be negative about, but we have to balance it as well. We have made tremendous strides in so many different ways. I just think we have, in terms of many areas that we have. I mentioned some of them already, like transport and technology. One of the things, I suppose, that we didn't realise in those days is that, and I mentioned it, that most people, not everybody, but huge numbers of people left school at primary level. Now, some of them stayed on to be 14 or 15 in primary school, but the vast numbers of people left education at that. The amazing thing was, especially when we take it today, in 2015, that many of them were very, very, they were literate, and they had a high level of numeracy, even though they left school at primary level. Most of them could read and write. So that was, but they left, and when I thought of and often think since of the Celtic Tiger, the disasters of the Celtic Tiger, and this huge immigration that it brought about, the one consolation I always kept saying to myself, well, at least the most of the Irish people that are immigrating today are immigrating with an education, which is a massive plus. You might have to immigrate, but it's so much better going when you have an education than going when the vast, 95% of people that had to immigrate in the 40s, 50s and 60s had no education. So you can imagine what their lives were like. And going off to big cities like London and Birmingham and Manchester and off to America like New York, you could imagine for them the struggle it was just to live. Because I learned that in the prison, that education, not academic education. I was always arguing about that in prison because the measurement was always, how many are doing the Leaving Cert? And I was saying, that's rubbish. They're a million miles away from the Leaving Cert. It's not important in their lives at all. But what is important is a fundamental, basic, personal and civil education, social education. I learned that in the prison. That, I learned, for instance, that vocabulary was so important. We take that for granted if we're able to speak and we have the words to express ourselves. But just imagine you don't have the words, how difficult it is. And the blocks it creates and the difficulty, and then it undermines your confidence. And the most important thing of all is confidence. And honestly, going back again now to my little parish in Banshee, my little area in Tipperary, a lot of people, as I said, left. A lot of people, most of the people that I grew up with left and went off to England, mainly England, but other parts as well. But the fascinating thing was that they used to come home then maybe after 6 months on holidays around Christmas, maybe out of the summer. And the change was so evident, the change in their behaviour, because what happened? They'd got a bit of self-confidence. So where did they sit in the church, for instance? Well, they used to sit at the back before they went, and now when they came back, they used to go up to the front, and people would be saying, "Do you see the heads of them going up to the front?" Just like the seats here. Right? I used to be able to say you could measure exactly the social status of people from where they sat in the church, which you could, because the confident ones were where? In the front, and the poor misfortunes were in the back. And that was a way of sort of putting you in your place. And if somebody, got too big for their boots and moved up a little bit in the church, the rest would be nodding, saying, "Look, see that?" And when you came from England, you had that bit of self-confidence. Travel, self-confidence. Travel is education as well. And so they had more confidence, and that was striking. Those little things. And then I was telling you about vocabulary, how important vocabulary is. It's only if you don't have something that you ever appreciate the loss of it or the absence of it. Because if you have it, you're not even aware of it. And I did a little program not so long ago, and after all my years, you think that I would be totally and utterly au fait with it, but I wasn't really. I didn't fully understand it. I did a little program with 8 young people around what was called John Lonergan Circus, and I brought them to Belfast for 2 days a week for 13 weeks, and they were fantastic. But I just want to tell you one little true story in relation to one of the girls who was in it. She was, from the moment she was introduced to the trapeze, she was absolutely just brilliant. She was just naturally brilliant. She never thought trapeze before, and I might say to be up on one. But from the very first time, she was just a natural. I said at the end that she was world class if she had persisted with it. And she was that talented. It was pure natural talent. And that was the purpose of the circus in the first place, by the way. And it's linked into what I'm talking about tonight. Because a television company came to me and said, "You're always saying that every child has a special gift. And given the opportunity, that gift would surface." And I said, "Yeah, I do believe in that." Well, I said, here's 8 children now that are early school leavers and have all sorts of difficulties in their lives. Medical, psychological, psychiatric, all sorts of difficulties. Off with you with the 8 of them and see what will happen. I said, "Great, no trouble." Knowing I was absolutely certain that they'd respond. Because I'm absolutely a believer in that if you stick with a human being, if you encourage, if you're positive with them, they'll make progress. And a whole lot of other little facts like kindness and humanity and compassion, all those little things are all so important in somebody's life. But anyway, in terms of the little circus, this little girl, I remember well the first time she put on a great performance. When she got down after being finished her first little stint, I went over to her and I said to her, really excited because I thought she was so brilliant. And I said to her, "Do you know what? You are fantastic. That is amazing. You are so gifted." And her response was, "F off, John." She said the full thing now, by the way. And you see, that was nothing got to do with being disrespectful. That was just simply she had no words. She had never received praise either, by the way, which is another factor. How important praise is. Some people get all the praise regularly, and some people never get praise. And you know, I have said over the years, and I believe this, by the way, that I never met a human being yet that loved criticism. Honestly, I never met anybody that loved it. And don't give me constructive criticism either. I don't buy him either. I don't buy, you know. You're a thunder in Egypt, but I'm telling you for your own good. Like you'd feel good after that now. But seriously, I never met a human being yet that loved criticism because it's negative and it's destructive and it's a put down. And I never met a human being yet that didn't like praise or encouragement. And it's about that. But anyway, it's just like that. So the two things I discovered with the little circus was the significance of vocabulary and how significant it is in our lives. And the other thing was about confidence. The confidence to be able to do things. The confidence to say, yeah. And I learned one other thing that I want to share with you because it's linked to education. And it's significant because we assume so much. And I suppose that's one of the things I'll be saying tonight is that we should stop assuming. We assume too much. There's, you know, especially around people who might appear, for instance. They appear to have everything in life. We often say that. So they have no excuse. They have everything in life. And how the hell do we know that? Just because they have money, for instance, or just because they have a big house, or just because there's an assumption that they have everything. Of course, money and big houses and things like that are only a tiny part of our lives. The real significant things in our lives are the human things. Being loved, for instance. So that's far more important than a big house and leaves a far bigger imprint and mark on us as people than property or social status or any of that old stuff. But anyway, we finished in Belfast and we came back to Dublin. And we were then up in the top of Leeson Street, Upper Leeson Street for a week, preparing for St. Patrick's Day because they were going to involve themselves in the circus, in the parade. And we said when we're coming back on the Friday, we'll meet you at the top of Grafton Street. And outside the Stephen's Green Shopping Centre, and then we'll walk up Leeson Street to the gym, and then after that you'll be able to make your own way. And 2 out of the 8 said, "Where's Grafton Street?" And we said, "Well, it's around by Trinity College." And they said, "But where's Trinity College?" I said, "Across O'Connell Bridge." And you go, they didn't know where Trinity College was. They didn't know where Grafton Street was. They were born and reared in Dublin. And that's what I mean by people who have been deprived opportunity and a whole lot of things like that. It's hard to believe that somebody could live in Dublin for so long, some of them 18 years, and not know where Trinity College was. And why? Because it was irrelevant to them. It meant nothing to them. Grafton Street, sure, that's for yuppies. And confidence comes into the in because I couldn't shop at Grafton Street because it's too yuppie. So confidence. It was like where I linked it back originally to sitting in the church. That was related to confidence as well. So you're not confident, and then that has huge bearings when you go outside your comfort zone, and so all our comfort zones are different. And at the core of it all is education, but not academic education. And that's one of my criticisms of the Irish education system, especially from second level onwards. It's obsessed with academic achievement. I said several times over the years that it's a great system to educate our people and our young people and ourselves on how to make a living. And how to make a living. But it's very poor in educating our people on how to live. And there's a huge difference. And for me, like in the prison, the huge challenge was to educate them on how to live. Because if you don't know how to live and if you don't have the social skills and all the things that we take for granted, well, then you're going to struggle. And that's one of the great difficulties around. So then we said, like, I read the Proclamation again this evening, just for tonight, just to remind myself again of that wonderful statement that's up outside the TPO. And you know, I've mentioned it several times over the years, but because of tonight and because of next year, it's important to read it again, because it was and is a fantastic piece of philosophy for any country. The aspirations in it are brilliant. And then you just have to say, well, have we achieved the aspirations, or how close are we? And then you say, no, we're not. Now, I did say about education, one of the most significant things that happened in Irish life, in my time again, happened in 1968 when Donogh O'Malley introduced free second-level education. Yeah, he has never, in my view, this is only my view now, but he has never got the recognition he deserves, because he was a visionary. He was a prophet. He was a person that should be, way up there at the very top, because he made that decision, and it has changed generations of people for the better. And not many people in a lifetime have ever been able to do that. And he did that. And he did it almost on his own, following on from Paddy Hillary, who was Minister for Education prior to him, who also recognised that education was the answer to poverty, and social deprivation wasn't heard of. But Paddy Hillary said, and believe it or not, the other thing was that women were neglected a lot in education as well in those days. Sure, they wouldn't need to be educated. So what will they be doing? Rearing children. Seriously, that was the attitude. So many women were deprived of education while the men were sent to education. That was another horrendous, horrible sort of an attitude. So many women were deprived of education as well, on the grounds that they wouldn't need it, if you don't mind. And this is amazing by 2015 that we have turned it, somersaulted that upside down. And now the whole thing has changed dramatically, where women today are very much unequal, if not ahead of men in terms of education and third level and the consequences of that. So we have, but that it's very important to remember that was, for me, probably the most significant of all social changes that were made was made on that basis, because that gave huge numbers of people access to second level education. It's hard to believe today that there was a time when they hadn't. If you hadn't money, if you couldn't pay for education, then you didn't get it. The other organisation that I must mention in that context, because they're often forgotten, and they're gone now because they're changed into a different name, but the VECs, the Vocational Education Committees, they did an amazing service for people throughout Ireland as well, in those days in particular, when education was deprived, generally speaking. The VEC idea was a great idea as well, because it brought education to people who wouldn't have access otherwise. And that organisation did heroic work in educating and in developing people and in helping people. And you see, what I've always said is that I have actually believed this, fundamentally I believe this, that education is the only meaningful solution to poverty. Kind of all the rest you can go and there's many other things involved and other elements to it. But if you said to me, if you had to pick one particular core element, I'd say education. Education is it. And why do I say that? Because I've from Mountjoy days and from other activities since, what I've discovered is the poorer your area and the lower the education status it has. Education hasn't got the status in the poorer areas that it should have. And therefore the culture is not to go to school rather than to go to school. And I also discovered in Mountjoy and often afterwards as well in local communities where most of the prisoners came from, that the dynamics are completely the opposite. That in the middle class area, every child that goes to school and does well, goes to university, does well, goes into workplace, does well, they're acclaimed and they're one of ours. Fantastic. We're sort of proud of that individual. Well, in the poor areas, the pressure is the opposite. In many cases, is who do you think you are? You're going back to education? Oh, you're getting too big for your boots now, miss or mister. And so instead of, are you going to work every day? Well, what are you going to work for? We don't work. So instead of encouraging, and in the prison it was the very same. The amazing thing in the prison was that if you came into prison educated, you were likely to take up further education. If you came into the prison illiterate, you were most likely never to go near education. And you weren't encouraged either by your peer group. So this is sort of the opposite. Now, there's always exceptions. So, again, I don't want anybody to stand up and say, well, like, I'm from a poor area and I went to education. Fantastic if you did. But the general trust of it was that you didn't get encouraged and education hadn't the end product that it should have either for children from poor areas, because the social element of the thing to often undermined even if you were educated. Where do you come from? And that was an inhibiting factor, which is a disgrace in terms of equality and fairness and justice and opportunity. You see, for me, I suppose the proclamation of cherishing all our children equally, I'd say, right, what's the measurement of that? And the measurement for me is that every child has the opportunity to grow to his or her potential. That's it, in a nutshell. Has every child in Ireland today the opportunity to grow to his or her potential? And the answer is no, they don't. And while that is the situation, then we cannot rest and sleep happy in our beds every night. We have a great old country. There's 138,000 children in Ireland today in consistent poverty. 11% of our children. That's a phenomenal figure. It has gone up 3% from around 2006, 2007, 2008. It's gone up, obviously, as a result of the Celtic Tiger crash and all that. But so while we have 11% of our children in consistent poverty, we don't cherish all our children equally. And it is about resources, and it is about distributing wealth, and it is about ensuring that every child has a fair opportunity to grow to their potential. And we have pockets of people in Ireland, young people, huge pockets of them, and they're totally disconnected from our mainstream society. And I know lots of those pockets and lots of those young people, and they're totally disconnected. And while that's the case, then we have a huge difficulty in talking about inclusion, in talking about fair and equal opportunity, and all that goes with that. What are the most important things facing us? That's the most important one. If you said to me, what's the most important one? I'd say that's it. While we have 11% of our children in dire, consistent poverty, can it be the government have committed themselves, I understand, the government have committed themselves to reduce it by around 60,000 by 2020. That's 5 years more. And even if they do, we're still going to be left with 40 or 50,000 children. And that's assuming that they'll no more come into the whole thing in the meantime. Of course, that's been a real optimist. So we can see quite clearly that that's going to be a huge challenge. And what is the fundamentals of that? The fundamentals of that goes back to Canon Hayes, sharing and caring. Sharing. Are we prepared to share? Not just in here now. I'm not saying that we all have dentists in here, but as a society generally, because that is the test. Are we prepared to share more, or have we learned the meaning of enough? I said that during the old Celtic Tiger several times. Has anybody any understanding of enough anymore? Did they know the meaning of it? And the amazing thing was during the old Celtic Tiger, didn't it promote that madness that you never have enough? It was amazing, like. And believe it or not, I'll go back to Canon Hayes again, because I've read a lot of his old stuff, and he was a bit of a prophet as well, really, because of the time he was around. But he predicted that. He said that if we classify human beings as production units, we shall have failed miserably. And sure, during the Celtic Tiger, what were we? We were production units. We changed, some people here would remember this, and some people would have been involved in it. We used to call the section of an organisation in the private or the public service as the personnel section. Personnel. And what did we change it to? Human resource. I was never happy with that. Seriously, I used to always say, I'm not your bloody resource. I'm not your resource. I'm not a computer that you own. Yeah? I'm not a piece of machinery. I'm a human being. I work for you, but I'm not your resource. But it was, I suppose, an indication of the way we sort of, I'm paying you a wage and now you're one of my resources, and we'll sort of take it from there. And then if you weren't any use as a resource, you were disposed of. I wrote an old article many years ago, and I said you were like the old, they changed the milk bottle to an old carton, so that you could dispose of it into a bin. And we tried to do the same thing with human beings. He's no use anymore. She's no use. Get rid of her. That was the old attitude. And that was the old philosophy. It was all about, as Thatcher said, it is all about individuals and families. There's no such thing as society. And she said that, actually. There's no such thing as society. There is a society, in my view, and we all have a responsibility and an attachment to that society, and we have a responsibility to ensure that that society is cohesive and works well. And if you don't... Now, at the moment, I would say in 2015, I would suggest, this is my analysis of it, we have the most fragmented society we ever had. I'm not saying we hadn't fragmented societies, but we had. But when I was a child growing up, who did we blame for all the poverty in Ireland? The Brits. All the Brits. They took all our land, they took all our property, they fixed up all their own people, and they put us all out, the peasants, and gave us nothing. So we said to hell with them, didn't we? And that was it. And we had a fierce anti-British thing, and a lot of that was indoctrinated into us because the Brits took it. And then we got our own country, and we got to control ourselves, and we've made it worse. And I'd stand before anybody and say that. We've made it worse. We have fragmented our society completely. And do you know what's at the very centre of it? The very centre of it is housing policy, especially public housing policy. That is at the centre of it. We made a complete bags of that over the last 70 or 80 years, especially in urban Ireland. Because what we did is we isolated people, we alienated people, all of the same social class, by the way. Because you cannot have a really vibrant community if you have all the same social classes in it and no others. And even our educational system has gone a bit like that. You know, there's so much to be said for integrating people, rich people, poor people, because then you get to know what it's like. You get to know them. They're ordinary people, actually. They don't have two heads at all. I was in a yuppie school a couple of years ago. A yuppie school. Well, it is a yuppie school. There's no criticism of the school. It's a school, but the children in it were yuppies. And I was talking to them about social justice and about how housing and where we live has a major bearing on how we see people. So I said to them, they were about 12 or 13, 14-year-olds. I said to them, listen, do any of you know a corporation flat complex, you know, that you can identify with that? I said, put up her hand. I said, oh. Yeah, I live, and there's one at the back of us. Ah, I said, that's great. Now, I said, what do you call the people living in that? She said, knackers. Oh my God, I said, you can't say that. I said, would you like somebody to call you a knacker? She said, I'm not a knacker. It wasn't the child's fault. This is what the child was conditioned into. But you can see how she saw the people living over there. Not one of us at all, them. And you see, we're brilliant at that. I used to say that all the time about the prisoners. They're us. They're not them, they're us. They live in our streets, in our communities, they go to our schools, they work in, they're us. We don't like that. But they are us. And it's so important that we recognise. You see, we can't cherry pick all the good things and say, well, they're all the things we did, were the brilliant things, but these are all the bad things, and we had nothing to do with that. Well, we had. And it is about sharing, and it is about sharing what we have, the haves and the have-nots. And it is about that, saying, I'm prepared to give. Now, there's another election coming up now in 2016, in February. And you see, I can see it already. My biggest disappointment, I want to say to you tonight, is my biggest disappointment is that over the last 4 or 5 years, we have done nothing to re-evaluate the type of society we've had. And we have done nothing to pinpoint, to signpost the type of society we want in the future. So the question is, have we learned anything at all from the Celtic Tiger collapse? And God, I'm afraid, I nearly have to say now, we haven't. There's no evidence that we really have picked up on it at all. Canon Hayes again said, way back in the 40s and 50s, materialism will lead to nothing but competition, jealousy, and all that sort of stuff. Competition and jealousy and greed, and it did. But have we learned? We haven't learned. And I suppose that's what it is. You see, and he was right about materialism, because we get obsessed with materialism. I said about not having enough. See, people didn't know when you had enough. They just didn't know when you had enough. And you saw people, or you read about people that, you know, there's some very famous names now that had billions. Actually billions. But they wanted to have more billions. So what did they want it for? Seriously, like, it was a disease, like. So you have 2 billion, but you want to have 4 billion. For what? What are you going to do with it? It's like your wardrobe. Look at all the stuff you have in your wardrobe that you don't need. Because a lot of it was put there because you got a bargain somewhere. I'm telling you. You see, we're conditioned into that. So you go into town or up to Grafton Street or Henry Street, wherever the shops are, and you see a bar. Oh, Jesus, I have to get that. You don't need it at all. See, you understand? And I've always said this to people, like, fundamentally, we need very little. Fundamentally, we need very little. A bit to eat, an old bed to lie on, a few clothes, and as Jan Vanier said, and somebody to love. I was with Peter McVerry down in Wexford a couple of years ago talking to a youth conference, and at the end there was a question and answer sort of thing, and one of the young people said to him, Father, well, after all your years now as working with the homeless and all that sort of, what are your men, what other things give you satisfaction and all that sort of thing, and he told this little story, and I want to share it tonight with you because it's a powerful little message about people versus things like homelessness. And I know you were talking, as Sister Stan was talking, but she wouldn't have this particular story, I don't think. But he said he celebrated Mass one night in Dublin, and during the homily he spoke about homelessness. And one of the things he said was, he said, any time you meet a homeless person from now on, will you make contact with the person? Because he said the one thing, he said, that they appreciate more than anything else is human contact. So he says, it's not about money, it's not, he said, it's contact. Just go over and say, hello, how are you? And a little chat, he said. They really, because he said that helps them to be somebody. So off he goes anyway. Mass was over, in comes to the sacrament, this elderly woman comes into him and she said, listen, I never thought about homeless people like that before, and I'll never again pass a homeless person without stopping. And that was fine. Off she went, and a couple of weeks later he got a letter, he said, and in the letter she said, you'll remember me because I'm the person who went into the sacristy. And she said, I just want to tell you, I was in Dublin the other day with my grandson, I was walking down the street, and she said, didn't I see a homeless man sitting on a cardboard box? So she said, I remember. So over I went, she said, I introduced myself and chatted to the man, and then she said, I gave €2 to my grandson, and I said, give that to the man now. And the little boy went over and handed the €2 to the old man who was sitting on the cardboard box, and the old man responded, thank you very much, son. And with that, the young man went back to his granny, and she said, just as he was coming back to me, the old man shouted, son, come back. The little boy went back again, and with that, the old man put his hand inside his overcoat pocket, took out a Mars bar and said, now, son, that's for you. I think that's a fabulous little story. You see, my interpretation of that is that was the highlight of that man's day and that man's year maybe. The highlight was to be able to give something to the little child, to bring happiness to somebody else. I bet he got more value out of that than he did all the old money he collected that week on that street. Because it humanized him again. It made him feel a human being. And I suppose that's really what it's about. It's about helping people to be human. And the best way to do that is to show humanity and respect towards them. My final little point I want to make is, if you said to me, what is the most important thing for 2016 and subsequent years, it's to put human beings and their needs back in the centre of society again, as the number one priority. And the economy should be there to serve the people and not the other way around. Because we were told, you're sort of serving, you heard the people, you heard the rubbish at the time, we need more scientists, we need more mathematicians. For what? Because business needs it. Mm-hmm. People first. And if you said to me, what should be at the very centre, I'd say human needs. And looking after the most vulnerable. And who are the most vulnerable in any society? The young. 138,000 children in consistent poverty, they're number one. The elderly. As you get feeble and as you get old, and what sort of a society have we for them? A harsh enough society. Many of them lying in old nursing homes looking up at the ceiling. Many living in rural Ireland in particular, and indeed in urban Ireland, totally isolated, alone and lonely and forgotten. And then the third group of people, I think that will affect all of us at some stage, and that is sick people. Sick people. So we should have a top quality, world-class health service. That when the very minute you feel sick, that there's a response, and that you're cared for, and that you get proper treatment, and you don't put a 95-year-old on a trolley for 2 days, like a railway station, with trolleys shunting all night. That tells me that while we have come a long way from 1916 to 2015, we have forgotten some fundamental basics on the way. We've forgotten that being affluent, having materialistic things, being better off financially, as many people are, is not the be-all, end-all. That at the very hub of it are the human needs. Will I be cared for when I'm sick? Will I be cared for when I'm old? Will children who are neglected and who are vulnerable and who are in poverty, will their needs be a priority? For me, they are things that we should focus on. And they're the things we should demand next year in February or March, whenever the general election comes up. Because at the end of the day, my final part of it is, we get the government we deserve. There's no point in blaming politicians. At the end of the day, it's us who elects them, who decides what we want. So when the politician tells you, I'll give you more money back, you tell him or her to hump it. Keep your own money. It is our money anyway. But let's look after children in poverty, families in poverty, families at risk, the sick. Let's get rid of trolleys and let's look after the elderly and give them a quality of life as they end their life in this world.
John was willing to take any questions or any comments people might have, because it was a wide-ranging discussion. He must have provoked some things out there. So if anybody wants to put a question or put a view, Evan?
John, would you not go for election?
Oh my God, no! God, no! I have no. Honestly, first of all, I'd be told Maverick. So I'd be used to it. No, we wouldn't. We'd be totally isolated. Like I just wouldn't accept party whips. I just wouldn't go in and vote for anything that I wouldn't believe in. In the story, I just wouldn't do it. So I'd be expelled in a week. And so I do my own little bits of chipping away when I get the chance, and I actually do get, which I'm very fortunate, and I do appreciate it as well. I do get great opportunities on radio, on television sometimes, and around the country in particular, talking at all sorts of. Would you believe it now? I'm invited. I suppose one of the things I'd said over the years that I'm so privileged to have this opportunity, that I have been invited regularly into affluent areas, and I am invited regularly into the poorest of poor areas. In schools and with parents and in communities and a whole lot of things. And I suppose I did put this together myself, you see. It's a little bit cynical, but it really meant. And that is, I said, my mission was to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. So I have a different, I suppose, approach when I go to affluent areas. I constantly challenge them around the things of sharing and of thinking about others. And when I go to the poor areas, which as I said, I'm so privileged to be invited often to schools or to parish or whatever to be, I do the opposite. I just simply say, look, you're fantastic. And I suppose that was one of the things that I realised in prison, with prisoners now as well, is that many of them, I often said at the end of a long discussion with them or getting to know their lives, as I did a little bit over the years, I often said, honestly, they're brilliant to be as good as they are, considering what they have lived through. Some of the suffering and some of the pain inflicted on them, and some of the difficulties that life inflicted on them. And I did come up with the belief after that. You have no right. I was in a school today, by the way, and a teacher came up to me and she said to me, listen, she said, I'll never forget something you said on radio about 20 years ago. And I said, what was that? And she said, you don't ever judge another human being because you have no right to. And I said, well, I actually still believe that, because you don't know. So in terms of that, I mean, wherever I go, I do try to, I suppose, to make people aware of some of the things that they should be aware of, and particularly with those who are struggling, to give them a little bit of praise, a little bit of encouragement and all that. And I did say when I was in Mountjoy that the people I admired most were the mothers who used to frequent prison regularly as visitors now. And no easy task to go up to Mountjoy to visit a son or a daughter, for a mother or a father. One of the toughest tasks, I would think, like you could imagine what it's like. And the more higher up you are socially, the more of a stigma is attached to it, believe it or not. But it was and still, who are the biggest number by far? Visitors, mothers. And they didn't come up to tell them, well done for Robin. But they see, as Jean Vanier said, they were there. Because why were they there? Because they loved their child. Many of them lacked that in their lives, a positive male role model. And since then, when I'm involved on the board of Bernardo's for the last for over 5 years now, and they often do work with parents and a whole lot, and other organisations as well. And I always ask that question, how many parents are attending? And they'd say 40. How many dads? And they'd say 3. And believe it or not, when I do a lot of talks with parents at second level and primary level, but just about parenting, and because I believe in the fundamentals of, again, if you look after the child and caring and tenderly and gently and bond with the child, all that sort of stuff, that is lifelong, and again, this is a fact of a reality. The poorer the areas I go at, the fewer dads that are there. The higher the social classes I go to, the more dads are. And in some very yuppie areas when I'm there, I hope people are not getting insulted now about when I call it yuppie. I'm just talking about areas that have high social status, like looking out at places like Foxrock or Castleknock or Stillorgan, where I live, places like that. But when you look at that, but the amazing thing that in those schools is it's often 50-50. There's as many dads as mums. And you go down the lower scale, and in these areas, like in Limerick City, there's two very well-known areas in Limerick City, My Ross and South Hills. 50%, minimum 50% of parents in those two big, huge housing estates are single parents, and inevitably most of them the mums. Not always, but 95% of the mums. And they mean that there's no positive male model or role model in their lives at all. And if there is a male role model in their life, it's usually negative. He's in prison or whatever it would be like. And when I said in Mountjoy like that, the distinction between a man and a woman in prison, believe it or not, is that a man, and there are 97% are men, by the way, only 3% women in prison, 97% are men. When men go to prison, they leave all their problems outside. They've only two things they're concerned about when they're in prison. First thing is they want their partner or their friend or their wife or spouse or mother or whoever it is to come and visit them, because a visit is a big thing for them. And they wanted to bring them up money for smokes. That's it. And then there's Happy as Larry lying above in the bed. Not a worry about outside. A woman goes to prison, and what does she do? She brings every problem in her life with her. Her mother, her flat, her children. Jeez, the list is that thin. And seriously, they're all the time worrying about who's going to look after my man, who's going to bring my child. My child has a hospital appointment. They have all the worries of the world with them because they're still connected to their families at the outside. So the absence of positive role models is a huge issue in those areas. And as I said, and if there are role models, they're often negative role models, so that they're imitating people who are already into criminality and into negativity and all that sort of stuff. And that is a huge challenge. Now, we introduced one final little point I make on this, which is amazing. And I know that I saw on a newsletter somewhere the other day that they're doing a parenting course in Limerick. But we had a project in Mountjoy. You read about it in the book, because it's called the Connect Project. And that was disbanded, and that was a disgrace, because that was a great project. But a module in that project was a parenting weekend, where outside parenting support groups came into the prison, brought the children in, the mothers brought in the children, and then left. And the parenting groups came in, and the fathers took responsibility for the children only for one Saturday. Just one Saturday. Listen, I'm serious. Most of them never, ever spent any time with their children at all. They never changed a nappy. They never fed the child. But the amazing thing was that when every time there was a graduation, what element of the course got the highest rating from the men? The parenting course. Isn't that amazing? They never realised, really, God, there's great satisfaction to be minding a child, and there's great crack in it. They never did it, so it wasn't my job to do. So they never had that bonding with the child, and they never had that experience. And they hadn't the skills either. And that's what I was saying about, we take it for granted so much that everybody has the skills to do, and the knowledge. But so the absence of male role models in their lives, positive, is huge. It's huge, and it certainly is an issue, and it's a very difficult issue to address. Finally, I suppose in that context as well, the change in Irish society and in change of culture has contributed to this as well. Because one of the things that I discovered towards the end of my time in Mountjoy, which is over 5 years ago now, is that several mothers were coming up to the prison to visit 3 different dads. So that she had 3 children, but there were 3, and the 3 of them, in some cases, were in Mountjoy. So again, you see, people would never think about that, but you can just imagine the confusion of that, the lack of stability and all that sort of stuff. And again, the children often not knowing really who's my dad. And these are all things that, now that's not confined, as you know, exclusively today to people who end up in prison, but it's a new change in Irish culture and all that stuff. But it has, like many other things, positives, and it also has some very serious negatives. And I suppose the thing with our society often is we often don't address the negatives until the damage is done. So I do believe that what the point you're making is a very relevant point, and a point that really hasn't got the sort of publicity that it deserves, and the response from us as a society that it deserves, because the absence of fatherly figures, of positive role models in the lives of boys and girls, but particularly boys, is a very serious vacuum. A prison community is a totally unbalanced community. All men, all women. No children, you see, so it's unbalanced. And any community that's totally unbalanced isn't a healthy community. Sure, it couldn't be. And you see, I always believe that if you treat people with respect, and that's what I used to say, if you identify the humanity in another human being and nurture it, then you have made progress, because that once a person becomes aware of their own humanity, they are far more likely to identify the humanity in others and the importance of humanity in others. And so that's the sort of stuff. So there's tremendous potential, but you do need people. And the culture in prison officers, the culture is very difficult, I'm telling you. It's very difficult. And we did a lot of work in the women's prison, the Doka Centre, trying to change the role of prison staff into more care staff than custodial staff. And that was the philosophy. But we came up against a lot of blocks and a lot of obstacles. Some of it from within and a lot of it from without. And you have to be a strong person to be able to say, I'm a human being, I'm being true to myself, and I'm going to operate as a human being. I do believe that even in prison that you can do a lot of good. I'm serious now. I've met several people in prison, prisoners serving long sentences in prison, and have done amazing stuff in prison for fellow prisoners, for staff, for community through work projects and things like that. So this idea that somebody, because they're in prison, they can't do any good. Like we trained with the Samaritans now. I have to say, it wasn't just ours, it was the Samaritans' main work. But the Samaritans trained listeners, for instance, in the prison, long-term prisoners, a lot of them lifers, to become trained listeners for prisoners who are depressed and who might be suicidal, and they could be unlocked at any hour of the night and morning, all through the night, to go into a little room and to listen to somebody who is depressed and that. Now, some of those men have done amazing work and has saved the lives of several guys in terms of being a listener. So in terms of I totally disagree with the death penalty. I totally disagree with anyone taking a life. I say no one has a right to take a life, and it's not religious, it's just a fundamental human civilized belief that I have, that nobody has a right to take life, and that means the state hasn't a right to take life either. So because that's the end. And so while you're alive, there's always the possibility of you doing some good for somebody, whenever that is. And that's why life is. Every day is a new beginning, and every day is a new opportunity. And maybe if I was sent to Mount Joy for life, that somebody would take pity on me, because I do believe sometimes that mercy is more important than justice.
And that concludes the second in this series of public lectures here from the Carmichael Centre. We're grateful to our guest speaker today, John Lonergan. I wish to thank Dermot O'Corbuy, Ken Kilbride and all the staff here at the Carmichael Centre, and also grateful thanks to Dublin City FM staff of Jay Hunter and John Kennedy for their help too. We hope that you're enjoying this series of public lectures, and if so, do join us for the next one, where we'll hear from journalist Fintan O'Toole. And so from all here at the Carmichael Centre, and from me, Paul Maloney, till next time, goodbye.